So, good morning, good afternoon, good late night, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to have the senior with a six pack, Daniel Trevor. We'll talk a little bit more about Daniel as I let him introduce himself in just a few minutes. But we've got a couple of questions about this other person that's attending with us a lot, Jeannie Shanholzer. Now, Jeannie is our nurse practitioner, our chief nurse practitioner, and has been helping us scale our medical practice. As you might imagine, especially when we opened up for Medicare, we started getting a lot of people coming in. And believe it or not, we got more growth in the direct pay programs as well. People are just very excited about getting care. There's no way I can provide all of that alone. So we're bringing on folks to help us. And Jeannie has been very good at helping us get started in that space. One of the things that she's going to be doing over the next few weeks is providing a lot more information on just how to get the correct labs, the correct imaging for a good cardiovascular workup. You know, it's easy to say, test, don't guess, but it's not so easy to actually get the tests sometimes. OGTT, for example, is something that a lot of labs just can't wrap their head around. And then insulin survey. Even if they get the OGTT, insulin survey has a lot of challenges. And don't get me started about the CIMT, carotid intima media thickness test. There's just so many different components to the testing involved in making sure that you understand fully your risk. And that doesn't even deal with things like Lp(a), which most doctors don't get, don't even know about. But again, as most of us on the channel know, caused Bob Harper's heart attack. Other things that we do, like fractionation. Thomas Dayspring loves to talk about fractionation. He's a well-known lipidologist. I respect him quite a bit. Like everybody, I don't agree 100% with him, but probably at least 90 to 95%. And he makes the point that most doctors don't get fractionation, lipid fractionation. They don't know how to interpret it. Well, you get a lot of things when you really need to know your cardiovascular risks. You get a lot of things that the current medical system does not know how to interpret. So, Jeannie, any comments about what you're doing, what the process that you're going to be providing, the information you're going to be providing in your series over the next few weeks?
Well, Dr. Brewer, I think that first off, good morning, everybody, and I'm glad to be here. I feel like we're kind of putting together and summarizing a lot of the questions that we get over and over again, and ways to make it more palatable, more so the patient's more informed before they go do anything. We have a lot of people think they're getting a CIMT, but it doesn't tell us if there's hard or soft plaque. It's going to, it's going to give specifics on all of that, so that when you go, you're more informed. So the process isn't so intimidating, and you feel comfortable, and knowledgeable when you're having lab work done, or when they're not drawing enough test tubes, or the lab's not doing something correctly. When we're seeing this on a nationwide scale, I think that we see consistent inconsistencies across the nation. So I can't tell you how many times that we look at an OGTT and we don't have insulin response, or, there's just a variety of the same problem. So we're going to try to streamline it, to consolidate it, and just to make it run like a well-oiled machine. And also, with bringing in the nurse practitioners on board, Dr. Brewer can do more development, and so we can get out there and see more patients, because we're making his system kind of what we go by and how we take care of the patients. I think that's pretty much summarizes it, don't you?
I think so. Even the thing we've covered a lot, but we didn't even get into one of the major concerns, and that is juggling your insurance versus the labs that you want to get. A whole different set of challenges, huge challenges. And yes, we can help. We understand a lot of the insurance components better than most, but again, we didn't buy your insurance. We didn't write it. There's work you have to be ready to do in order to get a complete and appropriate cardiovascular evaluation. And at the end of the day,
Absolutely.
you are your own Luke Skywalker. You're the hero of your journey. We're just Yoda. We can sometimes help you understand what works and what doesn't.
It's very
Now,
true.
I want to get back to Daniel Trevor for a minute. Daniel and I talked about this just a few minutes ago when we were prepping for the show. Um, yes, it's great to have the story of somebody who has experienced cardiovascular challenges, and he'll be telling a little bit about his story. One thing we should have done was put a little bit more about the topics that Daniel's going to be covering today. We're going to be discussing a couple of things that just don't get discussed that much on other channels. Topics that are very, very important. We're going to be talking about soft plaque versus calcified or stable plaque. What does that mean? Oh, why are other people not covering it? Why is it important? And it is critical. It's part of that workup that Jeannie's helping people get. One of the critical things, the CIMT is the only test that really, at this point in time, helps you delineate very clearly soft plaque versus others. And yes, we know there's plenty of people that are saying, oh, no, wait a minute. AI directed CTA, CT angiogram covers that. Well, it certainly purports to, but the evidence would indicate it's not quite ready for prime time yet. Plus, you've got issues related to cost, insurance coverage, and radiation that, again, you need to know about before you make your own choices about how you get your workup for cardiovascular disease. Again, that's a lot about getting workup for cardiovascular disease. Daniel Trevor has experienced this all firsthand and is here to tell us a little bit more about his story, because he came out of that a lot healthier than when he went in.
And
Daniel,
Dr. Burr, I wanted to remind you, too, we're already getting messages about getting an update on the release of Daniel's book. Do we have any information on that yet?
that's a very good point. Gilbert, why don't you put Daniel on and let's get started.
Hey, everybody. Good morning. Yes, and before you get into this, just to answer that question, yes, it's getting very close, and that's why we decided to come on, right?
Yep.
October. We're looking at October. So I'll give you all the details in a minute after you run this screen that you're showing right now.
Okay, so we don't have to cover all the items on the screen. The bottom line on the screen is to help introduce Daniel and give you some perspective on recent topics that we covered. Last week, for example, we covered vegetable oil dangers, the omega-6 oils with Chris Kenobi. He's an ophthalmologist who does a lot of work in this area, has some great epidemiology in it. And just as a reminder, it's what we call environmental epidemiology, meaning it's not so much randomized clinical trials. It's looking at the entire environment and the exposures that could be seen in that environment, not any individual, but great information, great evidence, and a lot of good work. I'm going to skip on over to see if we have anything else that we want to make sure we could cover. We do want to talk about dietary patterns, alignment with the American Heart Association. Jeannie, did you want to talk about this, or you want me to present that?
You can start, Dr. Burr, and I'll jump in if I need to.
So if you look at The American Heart Association, they have groups along with the ADA that look at diets. They just published another scientific statement. It's to serve as a tool for clinicians and consumers to evaluate if popular dietary patterns promote cardiometabolic health. They evaluated the DASH diet. If you're not familiar with that, that's a salt-based diet. The Mediterranean diet, the vegetarian diet, the low-carb diets, the low-fat diet, very low-fat diet, and very low-carb diet, as well as paleo. So they looked at everything. Daniel, you and I talked about Nina Teicholz. I know she's made some comments about this, and I think she's absolutely right. One of the main issues here is the failure to acknowledge the high prevalence of inability to metabolize carbs, diabetes, and prediabetes. There's some things that they're just not acknowledging, and they haven't acknowledged from day one. So we'll cover this publication in depth in the following weeks. Any comments from either one of you before we move on into Daniel's topics?
No, but I think that'll be very interesting as we cover that.
Yeah, no, Nina covered this, and also Gary Taubes as well. They pretty much ripped it apart because of their knowledge. And Nina wrote an amazing endorsement for my book, which everyone will see when they go to the website and when they get the book and all that kind of thing. And she's just wonderful. She really knows her stuff, and that's why her book was voted best book of the year by many publications and so forth. So, and I also got her to come on your show. As you know, she's looking at September. So we'll work that out.
Sounds good. And for those of you who might not be aware, Nina wrote the book, The Big Fat Surprise. And it looks at things like the Mediterranean diet and mostly the fat surprise is this statement that saturated fat, the assumption that saturated fat is really bad for you. Her book brings that into question. And again, really good investigative journalism. It's a great book, very interesting if you're not aware of it.
If I could just add the subtitle to the book, it's The Big Fat Surprise, Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet.
Yep. So what happened was her book was very popular. It was very well researched. And as a result, you had not one, but two large meta-analyses that came out in JACC, the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. Both of those meta-analyses said, you know what? It looks like she's right. It looks like saturated fat may not be the danger that everybody's been assuming. So if that sounds weird to you, most viewers of this channel, it's not going to sound weird, but some it will. Think again, take a look, start questioning some of your assumptions. Anything else before we go to Daniel's topics for the day? Okay, so Gilbert, if you'll give us the water ball, we'll get started with Daniel. So yes, that is Daniel there. Daniel, I'm not sure if you knew we were going to actually show your six-pack, but you're what, 70 now?
75.
75.
Well, that picture was way back when I was 74. Yeah. And listen, I didn't have any of this going on prior to my heart attack. I just dove into the science after meeting you and so forth, but I'll let you continue.
Well, to that point, I actually was a waist size 33 my whole life until my early 60s, and then dropped to a 32. Again, whoa. Probably from some of the same activities, dropping carbs out of the diet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
Daniel, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of an intro, maybe tell us a little bit more about your story, your background, and then we'll get a little bit later into the topics for today. Number one, muscles and how they are the safety valve for health for the majority of us, those of us who have insulin resistance, diabetes, prediabetes. And the other topic for today, a lot of us have plaque. For some of us, it's dangerous soft plaque. And what's the difference? First of all, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your story?
Yeah, good. That's the safety valve. I like that. I'm gonna steal that.
Well,
I'm using that.
Feel free to do so.
Oh, you keep embarrassing me. This I have to confess, this photo was way back when I was like 69 or something. So, but I figured it's a good photo. Why not? Let's use it. So, anyway, yeah. So about 4 years ago, I had a heart attack, and it was a complete and total shocker to me because I thought I was fairly healthy. I didn't know. I needed to have known Dr. Ford in order to follow his idea of test, don't guess. Because I guessed that I was fine on the inside, but obviously I was not. And everything that I do now with the book, with the show, and so on, and I'm sure Dr. Brewer coincides with this, is that I want to help people to prevent that first heart attack, because when you have a heart attack, you've then got permanent damage to your heart, and no one knows whether you're going to have a lot of damage or a little bit of damage, and so on and so forth. And so you want to avoid that first heart attack because it can lead to other things like arrhythmias, atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter, ventricular tachycardia, heart failure, and so many other things. So let's get people to avoid that first heart attack if we can. But anyway, so I had the heart attack, and then since I'd studied technical data throughout my life, I decided to take a dive into the medical and nutrition science to find out, hey, how could this happen to me? I think I'm pretty healthy. And so what I discovered absolutely shocked and infuriated me, because what we've been told to eat by the authorities, who's supposed to know better, is killing us. And so I looked into all this and then wound up, I decided to get a lot of tests done so that I could have a baseline or a benchmark to then compare my future progress to. So I did that right away within a month or so. I thought, okay, so because I found you and I found some other people, and I said, I got to get these tests. So that way I can have like I said, a baseline or benchmark to measure my progress. And I also wanted to know from those blood labs, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? I wanted to know, and I knew I was going to have a bad report card, but hey, I wanted to get it all done so then I could, in a few months, measure. Because I was determined. I was never more highly motivated to fix something in my life or that kind of thing. So I took the dive, and then I went to Google University and YouTube University, and I found this YouTube video that was titled something like, and you can correct me, it was something like how to reverse 20 years of arterial plaque like I did by some guy named Dr. Ford Brewer. And I said, I got to watch this. So I watched that, and you just totally blew me away, because Dr. Brewer gives in that video the exact occurrence of what happens in a heart attack. And I won't go through all the technical details right now, and it just really blew me away. And I got to know more about this guy and watch his videos. And you held up a book. It was the Bale Donine book. What was it? Beat the Heart Attack Gene. I had that ordered on Amazon before your video ended. So, and that came the next day. I read that like in 2 days. And then I went through it again with the highlighter, because it has a lot of your information that you had covered. And then I just progressed from there. Kept learning, kept studying, researching, PubMed, all of the studies, and I got to learn what studies I should ignore, what kind of studies I should pay attention to, the observational versus the, let's say, randomized controlled trials and that kind of thing. And I decided, hey, I have to share this with the world, and so I can warn others, right? Because, and then I was also getting tired of having to explain things to my doctors. And that was so amazing. And they didn't know about all these things that you and others that are on the vanguard and the forefront of the modern technology that has enlightened all of us. I would have to tell them about this. And they go, really? Yeah, I have to, I get their email. I have to send them something. I say, here, read this, and then you can catch up. Anyway, so it's been fun. Go ahead.
As you started sharing your drafts with me and we started talking about it, I remember thinking, the other book, I had never written this kind of book before. And I was looking to write something very similar to what you wrote. The other book, Why a Stress Test Doesn't Predict Heart Attacks, was basically just practice to write this book on the prevalence of prediabetes, diabetes, and the dangers associated with it. And as you started sharing it, it was like, oh, you wrote the book already. I don't have to do that. It was very exciting.
Well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. That's great. Yeah. Well, anyway, I just proceeded from there and, followed it took me down the path of ancestral eating and what's evolutionarily consistent for these genetic meat bodies that we push around all the time, and the way we've been eating that they're used to for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. I mean, all these new foods of modernity, if you want to call them food, I got to take quotation mark foods from the SAD, Standard American Diet, in the last 100 years has just been killing us. I mean, one of the things I point out is that the obesity rate in 1930 was 1%. Basically, it was almost zero for men and 2% for women. And now we're almost at 50%. That's 50x.
Yeah. And
never before in history has a population gotten so fat, so fast. And
it's amazing.
It really is amazing. So you got to go, this should be sounding off alarms like crazy in, the higher powers that be, if you want to call it like that. But then I'm thinking, hey, I'm not a conspiratorialist, but I'm thinking, well, maybe there's people that want us to be fat, sick, and addicted, and undereducated, and over-medicated, and over-psych drugged, and over-entertained, and because a lot of them are so concerned with overpopulation on what I consider a wildly underpopulated planet. But anyway, that's a whole other thing, and I stay out of that politics and all that. So I just concentrate on the health and the wellness of the human being and what they've been used to eating and what they're not used to been eating in this last number of decades. So I'm trying to steer them in the right direction. So
let me interrupt, and Jeannie's seeing this now on a regular basis. We start, for most of us, unless we're Arnold Schwarzenegger and maybe you, our healthy BMI is 23 or less and down to 18 or 19. But we have patient after patient after patient after patient who starts with us at 25, 30, higher. But as they get down into the lower 20s, everybody starts telling them, oh, you look sick. Oh, you've got this. And it's like, I get it. It's our culture. And you may be right. There may be some, it may be big pharma. It may be big medicine. It may be, somebody political. don't go there, not interested in it. But our family members start saying, oh, you look sick. Well, that's not, there's a major disconnect in our culture now. The weight that's healthy for cardiovascular health is seen by almost everybody in our culture as sick. And that is damaging. That is destructive. Jeannie, from your perspective, now that you're starting to struggle with this like I am, any comments?
I mean, I see it every day, all the time, and the patients say it, and or they're where they're hoping to their goal, they end up changing as we go on, because when they change their diet, things change. But what I find shocking is that that CGMs haven't been implemented. In the mainstream, they're not implemented. We implement them, and people are shocked by using them. But I don't know why it seems like every child at puberty should put a CGM on and start to learn how to eat, just to figure out what foods are causing their blood sugar spikes and what have you, because it's easily attainable knowledge, but it's so hard for people to get their hands on. And it's just crazy to me how difficult it is for people to get the information they need to be healthy. And I mean, there's a gigantic industry that benefits from people being unhealthy. So not that I'm a conspiracy theorist, but there is a big P word out there that makes a lot of money from people being sick. So I don't know.
And Dr. Ford, does your audience know what CGM means and what it is?
I was getting ready to, most of our patients do, but I was getting ready to say the same thing. Go ahead, Daniel.
No. You know, yeah.
Continuous glucose monitoring. When this first became available, it's been available for years with a thing called Dexcom, but that's like $750. The first affordable one came out, over 5 years ago. It was not approved early on by the FDA. It was called the Freestyle Libre, made by Abbott. And that was a big, big deal. What it does, it's a little plastic button you put on the back of your arm. And it gives you your blood sugar values over a 24/7 for 10 days. Now, like everything else, like the things that we started out talking about, it's not easy. Some people get some challenges downloading the app that works with it. Some people get challenges making it stick. Sometimes the actual sensor itself is a problem. But it's like so many things in our space. It's the stuff that can be challenging to do, to work through, that really gives you the information. Jeannie, give us some perspectives on what patients are telling us after they get this information.
Well, sometimes they're sort of resistant even in getting them, because a lot of times it's not covered by insurance. So it's $75 or so out of pocket. Most of them will last 14 days at a time, and they change. I think maybe they used to be 10 days, but now most of the time they're 14. But they have to change this site every 14 days. And a lot of them are very resistant. They're already sticking their finger or what have you. And so they don't really want to do it. But once they do it, the eye-opening event, it's like you can't stop looking. Since I've been working for you, I've pretty much been wearing one nonstop. And I've watched it, with what you eat, with when you work out, with the response to working out and how it affects your blood sugar. But it's so informative, and it helps you make every decision. And patients, a lot of times they will wear them consistently. They don't want to just do 14 days because they are learning things about themselves. They will experiment. And, we've had people eat normal rice or white rice, not normal, but white rice. And then on the show, we talked about different sprouted grains, and there is sprouted rice. And so they were comparing that. So I just think we're going to continue to get a lot of knowledge from the CGM. I think that people are going to learn about themselves, because there is no diet that fits everybody. There's different things that, on the market, people market so many different things different ways to eat, different this, different that. But ultimately, it's how is your body responding? How is your blood sugar responding? And I think that's probably the biggest benefit I see from this myself.
And Jeannie, to that point, if I may add,
Sure.
it's a great tool to find out, even if you're just going to do it for 2 weeks. When I tried it, it was after I had eliminated everything. I found out the right way to eat for this particular genetic body. And
Sure.
what I did was as a test. Okay, so let me see what happens when I eat some bread.
Right.
Let me see what happens when I eat this and that. And then I could, you eat a certain food, and if it goes up, then I have to look back and go, okay, so what was it that I ate in my meal? Or this is what the person using it, what caused that? It will be a carbohydrate or a sugar of some kind. And you either need to reduce that drastically or completely eliminate it, depending on how sky high the reading went. So it's a good way to use it that way too. Even if you just want to use it for a couple of weeks to test things out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we have people, sometimes I will tell them, a patient who has maybe, I've had a few that have not purchased it or not gone and gotten it immediately when we write the prescription, but at their follow-up, I'll ask them and they'll be like, no, I didn't do it. And then we'll talk about it. And then they'll decide to do it. And I'll say, okay, for a few days, eat like you're normally eating. And then, start to change your diet so you can see the difference. Or if they start taking a supplement, for like berberine, for example, all of a sudden they'll see what happens before berberine, then after berberine. So I think that I just think it's packed with information that helps us make good decisions. And I've been in mainstream healthcare for a long, long time, pretty much until I started working with Dr. Brewer, and never did anyone talk about CGMs until I started working with him. I mean, if you're a diabetic, a type 1 diabetic that needed insulin, yes, but nobody else did they talk about it with. So
JMK makes an interesting comment I want to respond to. As a type 2 diabetic, Medicare will not cover a CGM for me. They say I do not qualify. I do not take enough insulin daily. Only 10 units Novolin 70/30 twice a day. Yep, the insurance companies, Medicare included, are not geared for prevention. They don't think that the rest of us need to know what our blood sugar is doing when we eat pasta, when we eat rice. And it's like, again, the entire insurance industry is geared to help fix a problem when it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix, instead of helping us prevent it in the first place. We will get there, but progress is very, very slow. Mm-hmm. If you're hearing what sounds like a chainsaw in the background, it is. I'm in Athens, Georgia. There on Monday, there was a huge storm that came through and took out trees all over the neighborhood. When I think about it, and when you guys hear the chainsaw, remind me, I'll go on mute. But we're going to have a little bit of that. So, Daniel.
Well, and I was going to. One thing really quick, Dr. Burr, we were talking yesterday about some of our information we're going to bring forward, and the reasons that most insurance companies will pay for a CGM. And it is crazy that someone using insulin, they're not covering a CGM, but we'll get into that more deeply later.
Okay, sounds good. Any more comments about CGM before we go on?
No, you're embarrassing me again, but let's proceed. Why it's so important as we get, especially as we get older, why we have to have muscle on our body.
Well, it is embarrassing you. If I had, I'm not so bad for a 66-year-old, but I'm not in my mid 70s, and I still don't look quite like that. We've talked about it. It may be embarrassing, but there's also a very important component here. We've had multiple discussions about, thank you so much. This is a very important topic. What sort of diet should I look at as I begin to age to help support muscle growth, muscle mass? Do you want to talk about that just for a minute? Daniel, before we get into more detail on the book?
Yeah, sure. Well, as we age, as you know, and I've heard you tell your audience, we have a stronger proclivity or propensity towards becoming insulin resistant, diabetic, that kind of thing. And as we age, that really turns off. It turns on all the diseases, because insulin resistance is the root cause source of cardiovascular inflammation. And because, well, we all know why that is. But anyway, so we really want to have some muscle on the body, because, well, that chart that I need to show to discuss it is a little bit up ahead, I think, coming up. I sent the chart about, right there. Yeah. So now, first of all, let me, there's two different studies and two different things there's one on the left and one on the right. Let me explain the one on the right first. That chart is from, let me just get it in front of me here so I can read actually from the actual study. And basically, it was a large systematic review, meta-analysis on 95 studies. And they wanted to find out, for people that are over 40 years old, what's better and what gets the best results. Is it cardio training and aerobics, or is it resistance training? And they they're all diabetic, they're all over 40, and after 4 months, this is what they found. This chart is from this particular study, and they found that the benefits of on this chart, you're going to see blood glucose, A1C, triglycerides, HDL, all the important markers that we want to have in good shape for metabolic health. And the black bars, they represent the degree of improvements for those doing resistance training. And the white bars represent the degree of improvements for those doing aerobics or cardio training. I mean, if you can even see the white bars. Now, again, this is just for over 40. And so you can easily see that the improvements for these important metabolic markers, blood glucose, A1C, and so forth, are much greater with resistance training than with cardio for those over 40. And so, and I have this graph on my phone, and I go to my friends at the gym, and I go, because they're, on the bikes, and they're doing the stationary bikes and treadmills. And I'm going, I said, what do you spend so much time on this? And I tell them about the studies and everything. I said, you need to get back on the floor and pump some iron there, whether it's the free weights or the machines. And I show them this chart, and I tell them, you see the black bars? That's the amount of improvement you're going to get with resistance training in all these metabolic markers. And I explain what those are, as opposed to if you do cardio, if you're over 40, you just don't get the benefit. So why that, I wanted to explain that first, leads into this muscle mass. It's called muscle glucose uptake, is what researchers and scientists call it. And as you pointed out many times, is that there's a very real connection between the loss of fat off your body, increase of muscle, and the health of your arteries. Increase of muscle and the health of your arteries. And we already discussed that insulin resistance is the root cause of the cardiovascular inflammation, because the high amount of glucose destroys the glycocalyx, which is the fuzz-like protective coating on the endothelium, which is the lining of the arteries, that protects the arteries from the small dense LDL, the dangerous bad boy, from invading and getting stuck in there and then leading to plaque buildup. And then when your blood glucose stays high hour after hour, week after week, year after year, you develop the soft plaque. And the soft plaque, again, is the source of heart attacks and strokes. And we want to avoid that, right? So what does all this have to do with muscle? See, the muscle mass pulls glucose out of the blood and into the muscles where the glucose doesn't do damage. And the science and the researchers call it muscle glucose uptake. So it's taking it out of the blood where it does damage and into the muscle where it can be utilized as energy. And so, and like it says here, let's see, muscle mass pulls glucose blood sugar out of the blood and into the muscles where the glucose does not do that. Oh, I just said that. I was reading it over here. I have two screens here that I'm going back and forth, so forgive me. And the researchers found that skeletal muscle glucose uptake increases dramatically in response to physical exercise and muscle mass.
This is go ahead.
As we age, we're more inclined to get insulin resistant and diabetic, and that's why we have to develop some muscle on our body, not only to avoid not being able to control yourself when you might fall or anything like that, be able to grab things and just have your muscles stronger, which also leads to stronger bones, by the way, which I cover in chapter 13 on osteoporosis and osteopenia. But, this prevents that from happening, having that mass, that muscle mass. Go right ahead.
This is such an important topic. People start getting insulin resistant at the same time that they're starting to lose muscle function. And so many people, we always use the term muscle mass, and people think, well, if I'm losing weight, I'm losing muscle mass along with my body fat. I don't want to go there other than to say we're really focused on muscle performance, muscle function, rather than muscle mass alone. But especially after age 60 and the mid 60s on, you start losing that capacity. Muscle is a safety valve. It is the big internal safety valve. It's all about body composition. We used to think that that body fat was an inert energy storage tissue. And since over the past decade, it's become very clear. It's an endocrine tissue, a bad endocrine tissue. It releases hormone-like substances that create and worsen insulin resistance. Muscles, we also used to think were more cosmetic. Not at all. They are metabolically very active. And as Daniel's discussing here, they are the major safety valve we have as we start aging into insulin resistance, diabetes, prediabetes. The insulin receptors that start losing their responsiveness to insulin get completely bypassed by metabolically active muscles. So it gets to another cultural thing. We think about cute little old ladies or cute little old men. Well, being little in terms of having little or no muscle in a 70-year-old is not, it may be cute culturally, but it is not healthy.
Yeah, that's right. I completely agree. I have images of in the book of hunter-gatherers. I got this one guy. This photo is from 1900, and he is just ripped, and he looks fantastic, right? And I asked the reader, "Do you think he had a fitness center near him in 1900?" No, it wasn't from that. It was from his diet. And the fact that he had to work like hell to get all the food together, to find the animals to kill and eat and so forth. So it was,
and drag them home.
Yeah. There you go. So it was a struggle. And there's another photo I have with three guys. I think it was taken 1939. And I say something like, do you think these guys were stuck on the carbohydrate overdose disorder? I say, not with those abs. Anyway, so it's very natural to look at, because like I explained in the introduction, I said, look, it's way easier than you think to lose weight and to get muscular. And I was never looking for a six-pack ab. I never had it in my life. After I followed the low carb, keto, intermittent fasting, and all the rest, they just appeared, right? Just doing 3 things that our ancient ancestors did. And there they were, and of course, I'm not talking about professional bodybuilder type abs. I'm talking about the abs that are there, that are covered by belly fat. You dissolve the belly fat and there they are, right? It's not something that I strenuously worked hard to get. They just happened. But I explain all that in the book.
So to your point, those are not 50 or 80 pound dumbbells that you've got in your arms there.
No. In fact, that's just for the photo shoot. That's what you call a prop. I can handle more weight than that. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I'm sure you can, but again, it's not like we're not trying to make Arnold Schwarzenegger out of people.
Exactly. Yes. And I have no goals for that either. I'm just telling you, this is the result of me applying low carb keto, intermittent fasting, and doing fasted exercise. And because there's so many benefits to all 3 of those things when you do it together. And by the way, fasted exercise has been a secret to Hollywood trainers for decades. I mean, there was that guy, the Wolverine? I forget the actor's name. He got completely shredded and ripped because he did his workouts with his trainer in a fasted state. And that's what I do towards the end of my intermittent fasting, and not to scare people with fasting if they don't want to. It's not like a long term. It's just that you want to do at least 16 hours a day, which turns us on this process called autophagy. And then when you do that, you get so much more benefit from your exercise, and it really heightens the amount of ketones. It accelerates the amount of autophagy. And autophagy, just briefly, is where think of a Pac-Man going through your body and eating up all of the cellular debris, misfolded proteins and all the stuff that eventually will lead to disease, but it's eating it all up. That's autophagy. And so, you might want to push that to 17 hours. I do 18 hours a day. And it's real easy because, the keto diet is also known as the never hungry diet. And you don't get hungry. And it's just amazing the results you get. And once you've gotten off all of the addiction, which I'll talk about when you show the book cover.
Sounds good. So some of what you're talking about reminds me there are bodybuilder components that are helpful to be aware of. One is reps. That's a quote from Arnold. I'm sick of reps, but I do them all day, every day. Another one that you're talking about is the statement that a 6-pack's built in the kitchen, not in the gym.
That's right. That's an old one from the bodybuilder days of the 70s. 6-pack abs. What is it? Abs are made in the kitchen, not the gym.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what they're pointing out. It's not muscle mass of the abdominals. It's the decrease in body fat around those abdominals that creates a 6-pack. And that's where you get into different types of fasting. That's where you get into eating low carb, because for those of us who have a carb resistance problem, as you mentioned, our blood sugar starts going up. Then when it comes down, we get hungry. So you start cutting back on the carbs, your blood sugar stabilizes, and then you're not getting hungry every 6 hours. For those of you watching who have questions about that, there's several books that explain that very well. Daniel mentioned Gary Taubes's books. Gary Taubes a few minutes ago. Gary Taubes, like Nina Teicholz, is a good investigative journalist. He's written a couple of books in this space. One of them is Good Calories, Bad Calories. Another one is Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It. And one of the bottom line quotes on that is the knowledge that we think as we age into middle age that we get fat because we're eating more. The bottom line is we're actually eating more because we get fat. And what does that mean? We're getting insulin resistant. As we get resistant to insulin, our body pumps up higher and higher and higher levels to manage our blood sugar. Insulin stops our body from burning fat. So because we're not burning it, we're starting to just store it. Well, because we're not able to burn it so much anymore, we get hungry a lot more. So you go back, you start dealing with the initial problem, the resistance to carbs, the inability to eat carbs and burn those, decrease those carbs in your diet, and you start looking like Daniel here.
Hey, like I said, this was unintentional. I'm not doing this to get into contests or anything, but I did this for me to get healthy and so on.
Anything else before you tell us a little bit more about the book?
No, that's fine. I think you got it. I think we covered it pretty well.
Tell us a little bit more about the book.
Yeah, well, okay.
So before we even started today, Dwight Baldwin said, "Hey, wait a minute. You've updated us on the book several times. Give us an update on the release date. What's going on?"
Yeah. Well, good news. It's October. So I'll keep everybody posted. I want you to have me back on where I can give you the exact, we're looking at mid-October, that kind of thing, before the holidays, because once people get into the holidays, they're too distracted. And so so the delay was because, I was on with you last summer and we were looking at fall then, but at that time, just so your audience knows, because I was getting such incredible response and endorsements from just amazing world-class individuals, I was advised to go to the Big Five in New York. The Big Five in New York, there are 5 large, the biggest publishing companies in the world there, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, you may have heard of some of those, and to get a book deal with them. And I was going in that direction. I had a guy in New York that was helping me. He's already a multiple New York Times bestselling author. We're going through this. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized how long it was going to take, up to 2 years, and how much it was going to cost me. And it was all this. So I said, no, I've got to go a different path. So I changed direction, and that was the delay there. And so now it's good that I waited, because I've added much more science and research to the book and made it that much better. In fact, I'm now up to, the book has, insofar as endnotes, references, and citations from scientific studies, I have 1,227, which is way more than any other health and wellness book on the mainstream market. And hey, I just wanted to dive into it, and I just threw it in there. And so anyway, so it's Unholy Trinity, how carbs, sugar, and oils make us fat, sick, and addicted, and how to escape their grip. And specifically what I'm talking about there when I say carbs, sugar, and oils, I'm talking about, of course, industrially refined and ultra-processed carbs, grains, sugars, and oils, right? And oils, you got that covered last week when I hooked you up with Chris Kenobi last week. He had this amazing charts that he was showing your audience. And he wrote me a great endorsement too that's going to be in the book and so on. And then it says, Daniel Trevor, heart attack survivor turned wellness warrior. And if you can lose Dwight Baldwin's thing there, can you lose that Dwight Baldwin?
Give me a minute.
Yeah, because that, and okay. And then at the bottom it says, with internationally acclaimed preventive medicine expert, Dr. Ford Brewer. There you go.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, there we know that guy. And having hooked up with Dr. Ford in those early days, I asked him if he would write my chapter, what turned out to be chapter 22, Don't Guess, Test. And in that chapter, he covers what are the most important blood labs, scans, and so forth that anyone can buy online without their doctor's prescription, so that they can find out themselves if they have something lurking, ready to pounce, or if they're just fine, or whatever it is. But now You can get those done on your own. And you got this guy named Dr. Ford Brewer where you can hook up with him and have him analyze them for you. So anyway, so he's there. He wrote chapter 22, which is the longest chapter in the book. And I'm real excited about that. And www.danieltrevor.com. Check that out. And you should type that in, www.danieltrevor.com, because if you just put in Daniel Trevor in your Google and you search, this website's new, and so I don't know what page I'm on, but the first page is going to find everything about some singer named Daniel Trevor. And then after all of his stuff, you're going to find another singer named Trevor Daniel. And then I don't know what page.
Neither of which is you.
Exactly.
I'm sure you sing in the shower, but you're not that.
Yeah. And
when I typed it in, I just typed it in Google and you came up first.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
What, my name or the www?
I put www.danieltrevor.com and it came up Daniel Trevor, author, and the book.
Okay, good. Yeah. So you see, it takes you right there, because if you just put in Daniel Trevor and search, you're going to find all this other stuff. And I don't know what page I'm going to, which reminds me of that old joke. What is it? Where's the best place to hide a body? Page 2 of Google. Nobody goes beyond the first page. If you're not in the first page results, you've gone to the deep hole of history or something like that. You went into digital heaven. You've disappeared. So you got to get on that first page. That's why I'm saying go to you got to type it in. But yeah, you don't want to be on the first page. So anyway, I'm glad you like that joke. I always enjoyed it too. So again, it's October. I'd like to read the dedication so you know a little bit more about it. The dedication says, "For the many millions who suffer needlessly or who have already been lost due to corrupted science and corporate greed, and for the many millions more who will follow that path unless intercepted by the truth." So I want to add that insofar as beyond the making us fat, sick, and addicted, and the diet and the exercise and everything I cover in the book, at different places in the book, I'm not kind to big pharma, big food, and big medicine. Let me just put it that way. And in fact, part of it is a bit of an expose on those areas. But again, there are wonderful people in all of them. I'm just talking about the hierarchy at the higher levels and how there's so much profit-driven excess. An example of that, for example, in big food, you have in their corporate offices, conference rooms filled with biochemical PhDs that are figuring out what ingredients can we put into these things so that we can addict them, so they buy more of our product, and they keep eating the whole bag instead of just a few. And things like that. It's like, oh, it's profit driven as opposed to health driven, because like I have in the book, there's this one quote I have. What is it? People are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and are treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food.
I've never heard that, but it's so true.
Yeah. So anyway, so go to www.danieltrevor.com, and you can watch my video near the top of the page. There's a video that I tell about the book and that kind of thing. And the fact that I had, well, I don't talk about this in the video, but you'll find out in the book that these are all silent diseases, as you know. And it turns out that although I was on the lean side, I was full-blown type 2 diabetic, because I got one of the tests that you had suggested, OGTT and so forth. And it just totally blew my mind, because I couldn't think with it. I was like, how can I be? I thought only overweight and obese people are type 2 diabetic.
You mean your doctor hadn't told you that already?
No, believe me, the tests that you're going to find out about that Dr. Ford recommends in this book, your doctor won't recommend, because they don't know about them. And because, you know, as you know, Doc, there was that study, I think it was 2019 out of Johns Hopkins, which showed that almost 70% of general practitioners don't know how to properly diagnose diabetes, let alone know how to treat it. So you're in trouble, pal. And that's why it was part of the reason why I got tired of having to explain these things to my doctors, which they should already know, right? So anyway, I had 4 silent diseases. I was a full-blown type 2 diabetic, which was the root cause of my cardiovascular disease, because if you're diabetic, you have cardiovascular disease. There's no doubt it, as they say in the hood. And so I was then, you know, so I had my type 2 diabetic, I had cardiovascular disease, which was also, the diabetes was also the result of my NAFLD, the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And fatty liver disease is, you know, the biggest liver disease in the planet. So that's another scourge on the population. So I had fatty liver disease, and then I had osteoporosis, which also was a result of all this, which I cover in the chapter on that. And I, from doing this transformation, was able to reverse all those 4 silent diseases. So anyway, I'm real excited to get this out, and that kind of thing. And so there you go, DanielTrevor.com.
So one comment I have to make, you mentioned the studies from Hopkins and Mayo talking about 70% of doctors can't make or don't know how to make a diagnosis of insulin resistance prediabetes. You said GPs. The reality is it's not just GPs. It's GPs, family practitioners, internists, and cardiologists. Mm-hmm. The ones that should be the most ashamed are the internists. That's what they're supposed to do for a living. And
I misspoke. Thank you for clarifying. Yes.
And we wonder why our culture, why our public doesn't know about this, why 90% of this is missed. 70% of the doctors that are supposed to be leading the public in this space don't know how to do it. And that is the bottom line root cause for our failure to respond effectively in this space.
Well, and Dr. Burr, you and I were talking yesterday about gestational diabetes and people that are gestational diabetic, meaning that while they are pregnant, they have a type of diabetes. Well, those people are, I think, over 80% more likely to develop type 2 diabetes as they age. So wouldn't you think that every single one of them should be monitored, or, you know, if you do a health history and someone says I have gestational diabetes, they probably they've already had a 1-hour glucose tolerance test and probably a 3-hour, because OBs know about these, because during pregnancy, every patient gets a 1-hour glucose tolerance test. 2 hours I'd never heard about till I worked with you. 3 hours I'd seen if you failed a 1-hour while pregnant.
Yeah.
Long story short, though, why is that not being assessed during intake for patients, and why are they not getting tested if they have a history of it? It doesn't even make sense. It's like they have the baby, they went through all that stuff then, and then it's forgotten about, and the rest of their life.
Pardon me about making this about me, but a lot of people ask me, Brewer, your BMI was like 22 when you diagnosed your own diabetes, and you were relatively young. You were about 60 or maybe less. And it's not like I have had family history of diabetes, but siblings don't have it at this point, and they're older than me. Bottom line is I have 2 siblings, one that 7 years older, one 6 years older. The first one weighed 6.5 pounds at birth. The second one weighed like 7 pounds. I weighed 9.5 pounds, 9 pounds. So at that point, what you began to, at 66 years ago, we thought that was a fat, happy baby. At this point in time, we realized that every ounce over 8.5 pounds, you've got significant risk for diabetes, prediabetes when you turn 60s. And as you're bringing up, it's not just the baby 60 years from now, it's the mom 20 years from now. When a woman has, at least in the OB area, we do have enough sense to continue to do proper testing for diabetes and prediabetes. That's the only place that you'll tend to see that in standard medicine. We do an OGTT when women are pregnant. A woman who has trouble on her OGTT during pregnancy has major risk for diabetes, prediabetes, as she ages over the next 20 years. And the point you're bringing up is just one of those points that's immediately obvious that we, again, just completely ignore.
Yeah. And I, even yesterday when we were discussing it, I even learned, so the babies of the gestational diabetic mothers should also then be monitored, because there's a link to that as well. But so it's, I don't, people are taking health history, but why? Because they're not applying it to practice. So I guess that's part of the frustration I see and you see, and everyone in this world sees daily, is just kind of the negligence of it all. But
I have a friend and patient who's a NICU nurse, and she talks about the way things are changing in NICU. With like so many things in medicine, there's huge developments on things like surfactant, which used to kill most preemies.
yeah.
So on the one hand, you're getting huge improvements. On the other, guess what the NICUs are filling up with? Overly large babies born to mothers with diabetes of pregnancy, and diabetes that associated with their obesity, which they had before they got pregnant. So again, the real pandemic is not just hitting old men, it's hitting women, it's hitting young women, it's hitting infants, it's hitting kids before they're even born.
Crazy, isn't it?
Dr. Ford, I know what NICU is, but for your audience, you want to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, we always need that, somebody to say, wait a minute, CGM, NICU, neonatal ICU. So the point is, even neonates, even kids as they're born, before they're born, are being impacted by the insulin resistance diabetes pandemic that's hitting all of us.
And when babies are born to mothers who are gestational diabetic, they can't regulate their blood sugars. So they have to have frequent blood sugar checks and frequent feedings, because their body chemistry has been affected by, in the womb, by their mother's insulin resistance. And so it just carries on. But I'm not sure why, I really never picked up on the infant side until you and I discussed it the other day. You kind of figured they resolved as time went on, but clearly, I mean, I don't know how many studies have been done to put the link there. I'm not sure if from gestational diabetic children born to gestational diabetic mothers, how common is the incidence of them having type 2 later in life?
It's greatly increased. There's plenty of evidence out there indicating that. It's actually a whole new topic. And I know we've had some discussion about you being able to bring more of that focus with women to the practice. We'll talk about that as that develops. But this brings up the whole topic of epigenetics. We tend to talk about three things driving this process. Body weight, the obesity epidemic, genetics, and aging. And we talk about aging being the major driving force, and body weight, body composition being the only thing that you can change. When we talk about those three things, we are really leaving out the fourth item, and that's epigenetics. It gets a little bit more technical, a little bit more scientific. But as I mentioned, that's really probably more the issue for a lot of us, like myself, than even the other three items. Epigenetics is where it's for those of us who remember the old days when you had a card catalog. the way to find something in the library. That's what epigenetics is. And for somebody like myself, biologically, I had my card catalog for my DNA changed when I was in my mother's womb, because she had the weight gain that she did. I gained weight as a baby. I became the baby version of obese. My card catalog and my genetics changed to where for the rest of my life, even 66 years later, I tend to have more of an insulin resistant, diabetic, pre-diabetic metabolism. We've made huge inroads into epigenetics, and especially the epigenetics of diabetes and prediabetes. I've got a few videos on it. It has to do with methylation, not the same methylation that we talk about with MTHFR. It's methyl groups associated with genetics. It's a huge bunny hole. I'm not going to go down that bunny hole today, but it's something for those of us who are interested in the science and where it's going to be aware of for the future.
Well, that's really fascinating, Dr. Ford. Thanks for sharing that. That's amazing. Hey, listen, I'm anxious to move on to the soft versus calcified plaque before we run out of time. But before we do, I just want to say one last thing about go to the website, danieltrevor.com. And what I have there is you can access a free preview of the book, in that you can get a PDF sent to you of the first 48 pages. And it has everything, table of contents, the introduction, which you don't want to miss. Do the introduction all through chapter 1. And that way, maybe that'll help some of the people hold them over until it's available in October. But anyway, you can access that free preview at danieltrevor.com. So anyway, let's get into the soft.
Dwight Baldwin can go to www.danieltrevor.com right now and get the first 48 pages and get started.
There you go.
Sounds good. To your point, we've got a lot of stuff to cover. And I think, again, we'll have to have you back to talk about things like osteo and some of the other things. We may not get to a full discussion of soft plaque today. We may have to do an abbreviated discussion on that. Go ahead and get some, let Jeannie manage the questions as we go through the Q&A section. But why don't you just give us a brief preview on something that nobody else talks about?
Yeah, no, listen, you are the only one. And what we're going to show today, there's no one on YouTube or anywhere on the internet that's talking about what we're going to embark upon here. And that's in my book in chapter 19. Can you go to the next slide after this one? Yeah, right there. I'd like to get into just a little bit for those who don't know about the soft plaque. When soft plaque is formed in the body, your body tries to heal it by depositing calcium, which results in calcified plaque. And that's what you detect with a coronary artery calcium scan. And so as a result, the arteries are in a continued state of flux between getting worse with the soft plaque and getting better with the conversion to calcified plaque. And one of the studies showed that, it's not just about plaque burden, but differences in plaque density. The more densely calcified plaque is, the more stable it is. Now, here's some of your audience go, wait a minute, that's going to mean I'm going to have a higher calcium score. Hold on, we're getting there. Let's just explain a little about the soft plaque versus calcified. This chart on the right is from a study from the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, which is, there's nothing more esteemed than that place, American College of Cardiology. And if you look at the top left and notice the line that descends like steps from the top left. Each descent represents a heart attack or stroke event suffered by people in the study who had soft, or what they call echolucent plaque, soft plaque. And if you look at the dotted line at the top of the graph, that represents the people in the study with calcified plaque. Notice the lack of events, right? Okay, so the benefit of knowing whether or not you belong in the first group is pretty clear. You want to be in the calcified one. Hang in there with me. And let's see, I'm going through studies here, so forgive me because I want to read them. I give you word for word.
Well, while you're doing that, let me make a couple of comments. This is the Honda study. I covered it a few years ago, and this is what's called a Kaplan-Meier curve. It's a life table curve. And as Daniel has said, basically what it shows is if all of us would like to be in the dotted line, not in this line, because this line represents yet another one biting the dust, another cardiovascular event. And we don't want to have a cardiovascular event. So the point is, you want to have calcium. As Daniel's talked about, docs, unless you've actually gone into the CIMT world, you really don't understand this whole concept of calcification and its association with stabilizing plaque. I don't think we're going to have time to do a full coverage on calcification and stabilization of plaque today, Daniel. I apologize. We've had so much other good content. I think if you have any other quick coverage comments, we can do that. But then I think we should have you back and talk a little bit more deeply about it.
Okay. Well, what about just like 1 minute on the calcified? Yeah, there. Okay, so looking at the calcified plaque, and basically this is out of Cleveland Clinic, right? And Cleveland Clinic is rated #1 in the world for cardiovascular care. And they showed that, before I read that, it says, calcified plaque indicates that heart disease has been present for long enough for an inflamed lesion, meaning soft plaque, to heal and calcify. And then they say this, the CAC, coronary artery calcium score, is like the tip of an iceberg, whereas the soft plaque is what's under the surface. What's really dangerous is the soft plaque, and estimates reflect that approximately 4 times as much soft plaque present as hard or calcified plaque. And I make this point in the book. This is a very good analogy because what was under the surface is what brought down the Titanic. Very little damage was done to the upper levels of that ship, but under the waterline, that was a totally different story. And that's what brought down the Titanic. So the CAC scan is something good to have, but you got to remember that if you get a non-optimum score, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then there's this other thing called what do they call it? The CAC paradox. And just briefly on that, and then I'll let you go, because we can cover this a lot. The CAC paradox is where, what do they call it here? I'm reading from the study.
Can I give you my routine? We see it all the time version of the CAC paradox.
Yeah.
So one of the more common reasons for coming to see us is that somebody had a positive calcium score. They took it to their doc. Their doc didn't understand it, poo-pooed it. And they knew that it was an important issue. I get that all the time. And talk with them about, okay, we understand that. We understand the prediction of risk associated with it. And that's what we do for a living. We're going to get you where you need to be. Great. And so the patient begins to understand. They do they go through the trip that you went through, Daniel. They lose a lot of body fat. They start gaining muscle mass. They often, when supplements need to be involved, they take the right supplements. Sometimes medications are involved. And blood pressure drops. They just get in a much, much better place. They get that blood sugar where it needs to be. And then they get this thought, you know what? I'd like to repeat that calcium score. And guess what happens? They go back, they repeat that calcium score. They're all primed to do a victory lap. And instead of seeing a decreased calcium, they see a big increase in calcium. And they say, wait a minute, I'm in such better shape. I knew I was in better shape. And then they just want to jump off a cliff because they feel so frustrated. That is the calcium paradox. Now, why don't you tell us a little bit about the science?
Let me just tell you that was my experience, and then we can move into the Q&A. My first calcium score was an abysmal 600, indicating lots of dangerous soft plaque. That was the tip of the iceberg, right? So I had a lot of soft plaque underneath the surface. But working to achieve excellent metabolic health, doing all the things, changing my diet and everything, I had another one done 18 months later, and my CAC score rocketed to over 2,500. But other tests had confirmed that this was because my body had converted all of my soft plaque into stable calcified plaque. And this is the perfect example of the CAC paradox. So I say to everybody out there, don't freak out if your calcium score goes up instead of down after getting healthier by losing weight, removing the unholy trinity, exercise, and so on. And I have a quote in here from the book. It says, to quote Dr. Brewer from chapter 22, and he says, as you make significant improvements to your lifestyle, lose weight, and feel great, your calcium score can increase because with all these improvements, you are turning your soft, unstable, inflamed, and dangerous plaque into stable, non-dangerous calcified plaque. What we just covered here is just not covered anywhere. Everybody just believes that the CAC is the God. And no, it's important to get if you want, but the CIMT will verify and measure the degree of soft plaque that you actually have. And you print that thing up, put it on your refrigerator as a reminder, hey, I'm not supposed to be here. But even before that, you got to go to your pantry and your refrigerator and throw out all that stuff and get a new shopping list. So anyway, I'm ready for the Q&A now if you are.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And again, I think next time we have you on, we might want to touch on that calcium paradox yet again, because
absolutely, it needs repeating. It needs repeating.
We talk about nonverbals, especially on the show. Are these nonverbals telling you something?
Well, we generally don't like to order a second calcium score. If we have one on the chart, we keep the one, because so many people get discouraged by the second one that we don't advocate for it.
Because they don't realize they're going from this solid black line, which is skidding right down into death and disability. They're bumping back up to the dotted line. They just don't get it. Okay, so great. Gilbert, if you'll give us the Q&A, the transition for Q&A, we'll go into that, and then I'll let Jeannie take over and be the membership Nazi for the day.
Okay, it looks like we have a question from Ricky the Gun. Your book tells us why a stress test is a poor test for risk. So what protocols do you suggest when shortness of breath and angina are present? Daniel?
Oh, for me? I'll let Dr. Ford do that one.
Okay.
Listen, I'm not a medical doctor. I can't, give you advice like that. And even Dr. Ford can't do it over the internet.
Thank you.
The powers that be can come back at him too. But Dr. Ford is in a better position to explain. He's the clinician. I've been doing a lot of research and everything, not to diminish what I've done, but he's the clinician. Let's hear it from him.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I do appreciate the reminder that I cannot be your doctor on the internet. I am a doctor. I do this for a living. But if you want me to actually give you suggestions about what you should do next, you have to see us. I have to develop what's called a physician patient relationship. And as we've said, the slots are getting thinner and less and less available. That's why we're scaling up to see more folks. We're bringing on folks like Jeannie. She's bringing on more folks that can help you as an individual deal with your issue. It depends on breath and angina, shortness of breath and angina. What's causing it? Is it COPD? Is it lung related issues? Is it cardiovascular issues? And that's one of the first big questions we have to answer. With all of these things, it gets back to some general logic. You find it at Toyota. You find it, people have quoted, I think, Albert Einstein, but you don't have to be an international Toyota organization or an Albert Einstein to realize, first assess the situation. So we don't, as Ricky the Gun brings up, we don't recommend stress tests. It's very rare. I think I've used less than half a dozen over the past decade, maybe 3 or 4 over the past decade. And the ones that I'm thinking about, the patient really wanted to do it for a separate reason, and I just humored him.
Doc, if I can add one thing that I do know about this, if you're suspecting that it is a cardiovascular situation, the shortness of breath, you might want to get an echocardiogram, which is a simple ultrasound that your doctor can order. And that can measure if you've got, let's say, an important number from the echocardiogram is what's called the ejection fraction. And that number is way more important than your LDL cholesterol or any cholesterol number. That's the ejection fraction. See, the left ventricle is what's, when your heart beats, it squeezes blood out and ejects it out at a certain force. And you want your ejection fraction to be between 50 and 70. And because that blood needs to be, when it squeezes, it needs to be shot out all over your body. It's got to reach your feet, your organs, your brain. And if that ejection fraction starts to reduce, you can be starting to feel fatigue, shortness of breath. It could mean you've got atrial flutter or atrial, that kind of thing. So you do want to, that's one test that I know could detect if you've got, you want to check your ejection fraction. That's the number that you want to really understand about. And you can Google that later and find out more about it. Ricky the Gun. So there you go.
Your experience in the bowels of the hospital is showing.
Yes, it is.
This is something I have to tell my doctors. Hey, so what's my ejection fraction? You're what? I say, well, look at my echocardiogram and the number will be there. and a lot of doctors that do know about this, they call this, the ejection fraction and the left ventricle, the MVP, the most valuable player. So it's important to know. So. Okay.
Well, very good. So Jay Petard said, bravo on the CGM endorsement, which we just are real believers, and seeing is believing, I would have to say. Dr. Brewer, I have seen a lot of questions about do patients need a prescription for CGM?
I'm glad you covered that. You want to answer it?
Yes. And yes, you do at this point. I think there are some companies out there. I think that you join a subscription service, they provide one, but it's not anything that we endorse. And we do, we write prescriptions for the patients that come and see us for CGMs. We do.
I feel very strongly that CGM should be provided more in a preventive mode for the folks that tend to join our channel, the folks that are looking to prevent themselves getting into type 2 diabetes. And as we said, most of the insurance world is set up for people who are already way deep into it. In many cases, too late compared to where we want to prevent an issue. I feel very strongly that the FDA should not have required a prescription for it. I feel strongly that the insurance companies should not be providing this only to people that are on way deep levels of insulin. So yes, we can help. A prescription is required, and yes, we can help. And guess what? Multiple companies have developed on a national basis now, many of which imply that you don't need a prescription. What they're actually doing is hiring providers with licenses in states where they can go ahead and provide that prescription for you.
Yeah. So they still are required. Here's another good one I have seen a lot about. This Melissa asked, I have read that the keto diet increases your ApoB. Can you just lower your carb instead of keto? Dr. Burr?
So, if it's an interesting experience being inside the practice that we have, I will, every couple of months, I'll get a panic call from somebody who says, hey, I dropped my carbs. I went keto and my LDL, my cholesterol shot way up, and my cardiologist is panicked. My internist is panicked. They're telling me I'm killing myself, and it's because of the fats in my diet or the meat in my diet. And I have to remind them that there's a certain population, genetics among us who, and it's not just a few, it's a lot of people. Their LDL shoots up, their ApoB shoots up. ApoB is the protein that forms LDL, that shoots up when you start dropping carbs. And no, that's not just me talking about that. That's one of those other things that Harvard Health has mentioned several times in their cardiology department and their cardiology updates on the web. It's a known fact. In fact, there's a smaller subpopulation of folks that get what we call lean mass hyperresponders. They get LDL levels up to 200, 300. So I see somebody raising his hand there, David.
I'm one of those lean mass hyperresponder. My LDL just shoots up. But if I may add to that, it's so important what you're saying is that you were towards the beginning of the show, you were mentioning about lipid fractionation. And, doctors just pay attention to the main LDL-C number. And they don't know, they don't think about the fractionation. No one's told them about it. And what that means basically with LDL, there's good LDL and there's bad LDL. There's the dangerous one is the small, dense LDL, which can invade the artery wall, the endothelium. It gets stuck to proteoglycans in the intima media space, gets stuck there, and they develop over time, and it turns into soft plaque, and there you go with that. And so you want to watch out for the small, dense LDL. There's two types. There's the pattern A, which is the large, fluffy ones. The analogy I like to give in the book is that with the large, fluffy LDL, you just think of some beach balls rolling around in your artery, and they're bouncing around, and nothing's happening. There's no harm being done or anything. They don't attach, and they just go on their way. The small, dense one, think of those as marbles that are just entering into your endothelium, getting stuck and developing soft plaque over time, which then develops into your heart attacks and strokes. Because what happens is, at a certain point, the plaque will rupture through the endothelial, the lining of the artery. That plaque enters the lumen where the blood flows, touches blood, creates a clot. It breaks off, goes downstream, so to speak. And if it goes to your heart, you have a heart attack. If it goes to your brain, you have a stroke, which tells you that it can happen anywhere in the body, not just the heart. So, it's, again, they don't go look at the fractionation. They don't look, okay, so he's got high LDL. Let's do an NMR lipoprofile examination to find out, he's got the pattern A, which is safe, or he has the pattern B, which is the small, dense kind, and that's dangerous. So anyway, when you reduce your carbs and you go keto and all that kind of thing, you prevent all that from happening, and you reduce but the ApoB, it's not anything to freak out about, especially if you're getting metabolically healthy. your waist size is reducing, your HDL, the good cholesterol is going up, your blood pressure is coming down, your A1C is coming down, all these markers that will show metabolic health. And that's what they don't look at, the 5 markers of metabolic health, along with knowing about breaking down the LDL. Anyway, back to you, Doc.
Daniel, I thought I went down bunny holes. And what's interesting was you went down the very same bunny hole I was going to go down.
Really?
And not only that, you used the very same terms that I was going to use. So
great minds think alike.
Bottom line is, I've got a lot of folks that do full-blown keto. I recommend, and I don't really, I don't, as you know, I don't really focus quite so much on, we started some of the discussion about keto, vegan, plant-based, all of the paleo, all of these different types of diets. I don't focus on where your macronutrients come from. What I do focus on is, again, first assess the situation. We haven't done that. Because we haven't done that, because the majority of doctors don't know to do that, we've got a pandemic where even starting at age 30, over half of us cannot tolerate carbs. High doses of carbs on a regular basis are poison to over half of us starting at age 30. By the time we get, and it's an age-related issue, so by the time we get to 60, it's over 2/3 of us. What I'm requesting, what I'm recommending is not that different from standard public health people and everybody else that looks at the numbers, and that is first recognize the situation and realize that most of us, especially once we get into our 50s and 60s, are carb resistant. We need to have a little bit better focus on what we're eating, the macros that we're eating, where you get it, whether you get it from plants or where you get your low carb food. If you have that problem, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to me whether it's from plants, from animal sources, or whatever. But the bottom line is, I do recommend first you understand whether or not you can digest and metabolize carbs. If you can't, which is most of us, age 50 and above, then understand how to limit those. I don't recommend full-blown keto unless that's really something you can do more comfortably. I recommend starting with 100 grams of carbs. And Jeannie, you know a lot more about how we recommend getting into that in the long term, but that's another topic for another day.
It is. And now we have time for 2 more questions. Or 2 more statements. One here, Bobby Ocampo. This is interesting to me. The standard of care for pregnant women in the Philippines is insulin injections, even if blood sugar is not too high.
Interesting.
I had never heard that. Have you heard that?
I haven't heard of that.
I guess they're trying to ward off anything.
Yeah. Preventive insulin.
And then, yeah, very. And then, Daniel, this one is again for you. Will the book be available digitally? I saw a couple of questions. That one comes from Jerry R. I saw a couple of people asking digitally, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Can you elaborate there?
Yeah. It'll be first available on Amazon, digitally, hardback, paperback, the works. Audio, I got to throw that together. I've got to call into a guy at a studio. We're looking to do that too. So it'll be available in all forms. And again, we're looking at mid-October or thereabouts, but have me back again and we can do more of this soft versus calcified plaque, and because it's so damn important.
We also need to talk about osteopenia and the linkage. That's a very interesting topic. And I don't know anybody that's covered that.
Well, and it's addressed in women, but it's not addressed in men very often.
Exactly. And I point all that out in the book, and I give you the latest supplements that have, and with the latest studies that have shown, if you do these certain things along with your exercise, of course, to strengthen the bones, you can reverse your osteoporosis gradually back to osteopenia and so forth. So there are studies that have shown it, and especially with women between the ages of, let's say, 50 and 75, I think one of the studies was. Yeah, there's some real effective things you can do for that. And yeah, like that.
Yeah, and that's good. And again, it's addressed in, fair skinned, there's stuff about fair skinned women, older women, all of these things, but you don't hear a whole lot about men at all there. So that's good that you'll bring some light to that.
Yeah. Well, also there was a recent study that showed that the osteopenia is showing up in the age range of 35 to 50. So it's getting younger and younger now. And, you got to ask your doctor for what's called a DEXA scan, DEXA. And if he tells you you're too young for it, show him this study that's in the book. But anyway, DanielTrevor.com, and you can get the first 48 pages. And but it is available. It will be available in all forms.
Okay. Well, Dr. Brewer, I think we have patients to see, and I'm not trying to be too controlling here, but I'm gonna. So it's been a great show. Anything we want to add at the end?
Nope. Thank you for your interest.
Thanks, Doc. I appreciate you having me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Looking forward to having you
Take care.
back, Daniel.
Bye, Jeannie.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.